Hey everyone, Creeparoni here. What you're about to hear is an exclusive story from my new audiobook, Whispers in the Walls, written by the Tennessee Horror News Group. It's an anthology of spooky stories that you really don't want to miss. So, if you enjoy this story, please consider checking out the audiobook available at Amazon, iTunes, and Audible. The link will be in the description. Thanks so much. Dim blue light flickered on the radio dial. Panicked voices laced in garbled static buzzed and popped from the speakers, fell silent, then called again. The almost endless, empty expanse of black highway rolled imperceptibly under the wheels and out into the red-tinged darkness behind the taillights. At either side, the dry, brown prairie grass was stunted, burned dead by an oppressive heat that had only vanished with the coming of the night. There were no other cars, no signposts or trees along that lonely stretch of highway. There was nothing to suggest that I'd moved so much as an inch towards the far-off horizon ahead of or behind me. It was a maddening sort of journey that made me question my sanity almost as much as anything else that had happened. My left hand clutched the steering wheel, white-knuckled, as I struggled to focus on the formless asphalt through the window. My right hand was throbbing, cold and wet on the seat beside me, wrapped in dirty bandages as blood continued to pump through and stain the vinyl. The air was rich in copper. The gritty red fluids that had stained my clothes had oozed from my own wounds for hours, or maybe only minutes, as I fled through that timeless, motionless void, filled the cab of the truck with a sickening perfume. I'd been up for 3 days straight, and between the physical exhaustion and the injuries I'd sustained, it wouldn't be much longer before I passed out. Flecks of rainbow stars were already exploding in the corners of my eyes, a steady ringing in my ears as I struggled to stay focused. I'd been traveling for hours, or maybe just a few minutes. Between the state of my head and the unfortunately uniform scenery, I couldn't be sure. The radio had been an insane and unreliable gauge of time, with its sporadic bursts of horror-fueled noise and a dial that would only occasionally flash in bolts of blue lightning. My eyelids weighed 100 pounds and were pure lead as I struggled to keep them open. The radio crackled, the dial rolling down through static, garbled noise and screaming until it stopped on the only station still playing music. "Sinnerman, where are you going to run to?" Nina Simone asked. "You're losing it," I told myself as I turned off the radio. My voice was hoarse, full of gravel and phlegm, and barely above a whisper. "Just got to hold out a little bit longer. Get to that next town over." "Oh yeah, that'll do," a girl said from the passenger seat. I was alone, had been alone since yesterday night, but that didn't stop the lilting, breathy voice from talking in my ear. "You'll race to the next town and tell them what, exactly? That you escaped some sort of localized apocalypse in the middle of Podunk? They'll think you're on drugs." "They won't when they see what's happened," I answered. "Oh no, not at all," she agreed. "They'll think you're insane. I mean, after all, how many people did you chop up with that axe?" "They weren't people." I glanced at the bloody axe head in the floorboard, the splintered handle resting on the seat between her legs. "Of course they weren't. You saw monsters. Every last man, woman, and child trying to hide in that garage with some bloodsick creature, bent on mayhem and murder. You killed them all, then stole a truck to go find help." I shook my head. They had been monsters, every last one of them. Glowing eyes, teeth like a saw blade spinning around in their open mouths. The girl in the passenger seat was smiling, her eyes bright and green and glowing in the dim light of the radio dial. Her face was aquiline, her body lithe and youthful. She was wearing a black t-shirt with a band printed on it that I'd never heard of, and a pair of jeans with holes in the legs. She was drumming her long fingers on the dashboard and humming along with the music on the radio. "Who are you?" I asked. "How did you get in my truck?" She laughed. Your truck? Your truck. That's hilarious. I've been here the whole time. How nuts are you? I turned back to the never-ending highway ahead of me. Yellow lines flickered along the slick black pavement, like snakes racing through a dark river. They seemed to be squiggling from side to side as they disappeared in the red glow of the taillights, looking more like blood draining down over the back window. The horizon was a different kind of black, more absolute and unwelcoming, with only a thin thread of red-purple light dividing it from the ground at the horizon. Looking down at the gauges, a red line stood out brighter than any light I'd ever seen. It pointed towards the large white E at the bottom of the fuel gauge and hovered dangerously close to the bottom of that letter. "How long are we going to do this?" the girl asked. "How much longer do you think you've got before the gas runs out, or the engine blows, or you pass out behind that wheel from your injuries? How long before you can't keep running away anymore, and they come for you?" "I've been driving for days like this," I told her, staring at the never-ending road ahead. "I'll drive forever if it takes. The gas won't give out." She put her bare feet on the dash and leaned her head against the window. "So, where are we, genius?" she asked. "Doesn't matter," I told her. My head was throbbing now, and my vision was blurring in my left eye. "We're miles away from those things, and we're going to keep putting miles between us." The truck jerked to the left into the opposite lane. I pulled it back and tried to steady myself. Blue light suddenly began to flash in the rearview mirror. "Look at that," she said, half laughing. "Maybe the cavalry's arrived." The lights of the police car were brighter, larger, as it came up on the back of the truck before whipping around the driver's side to approach the window. I was so happy to see something, anything on this barren, desolate stretch of road, that I didn't think about the strangeness of things until it was too late. After all, where had that car been hiding that I couldn't see? And why was it racing up beside me? The passenger window of the black and white cruiser rolled down, and a man in a familiar black uniform leaned out. His skin was mottled gray and hanging loosely on his bones. His eyes were sunken into their sockets, milk-white and sightless. His teeth were jagged, pointed like shark teeth, and seemed to spin around inside his slack-jawed mouth. "Stop the truck!" the monster bellowed. "Time to get what's coming to you." "I wouldn't stop," the girl said. "No shit," I grumbled, gunning the gas. The truck lurched forward, began to groan, and then picked up speed. Well, the gauge showed that we were gaining speed, even though the surroundings outside didn't seem to be moving. The cop car kept pace, the thing in the passenger seat slamming a nightstick against the door and howling as he tried to open it. I pulled to the right, gravel kicking up under the tires as I rode the shoulder. The cruiser matched me. Closing my eyes, I took a deep breath and clutched the steering wheel. With a hard jerk to the left, I rammed the car. Metal crunched and scraped. Meat squelched, and bone cracked like thunder. The thing in the car continued to howl as its head was crushed between its door and mine. Blue lights flashed and began to spin wildly, flying off into the night before disappearing entirely. "Good idea," she said. "Kill some cops while you're at it. No way that could backfire on you." "They weren't cops," I muttered. "They weren't human." "No? Neither were the people at the gas station either, right?" An alarm began to buzz from the dash. From the fuel gauge, an amber light had flicked to life and was beginning to razz me. "Bingo," the girl said. The engine began to sputter and knock as a sudden flash of blue appeared in the rearview mirror. Behind me, the dark horizon was suddenly filled with a blue flashing light. I knew what was coming next. "So, I guess this is the end of the road?" she said. I looked over at the girl. Her skin was sallow, features all jaundiced and drained the way a fresh corpse looks lying on the ground. Her thin, pretty face was shattered like an egg, black fluid oozing from the cracks. Her green eyes bulged in their broken sockets as she reached up with a gnarled hand to turn off the radio. The silence was immediate and deafening. "Guess it is," I told her. See you in hell, kid. And with that, I jerked the wheel and gunned the gas. The truck took a sudden, violent jump over the shoulder of the road and went airborne. Glass shattered as the girl's ragdoll body flew through the windshield. Hands reached through the broken glass and grabbed me violently by the scruff of my shirt, yanking me forward into the darkness. I opened my eyes in the sunshine outside a familiar gas station in the middle of nowhere. A man in blue coveralls had a hand on my shoulder as I stepped out of the pickup truck. He was a big, friendly-looking fellow, with a bright smile yellowed by chewing tobacco, who smelled of motor oil and sweat. I knew him. At least, I'd known him. He'd been one of those things that I bludgeoned with an axe handle before taking off into the hellscape I'd just come from. "You all right, pal?" he asked. Do you maybe?" I stammered incoherently. The man's friendly face sank into one of worry and concern. "God damn it, Laura," he muttered under his breath. "What?" I asked. "I'm never going to sell that truck," he continued. Ushering me into the shade of an open garage bay, he pulled a cold bottle of beer out of a cooler, twisted off the lid, and handed it to me. "Drink," he told me. "Something tells me you've earned it." "What the hell just happened?" "That was my sister's truck," the mechanic began. "Laura. She was always a little touched, as our mama used to say. Had all kinds of mad fits and wild stories. Bipolar schizophrenic more than likely. But my parents didn't believe in seeing shrink, so she never got diagnosed. When she turned 19, she started raving about monsters everywhere. Said we were all just walking corpses trying to eat her soul. One night, we're all gathered for dinner and she walks in with an axe handle and starts trying to beat us all to death. Nearly kills our mama and our 2 younger sisters. She broke her hand on our daddy's jaw, and I managed to bounce her head off the hood of that truck before she took me down with the axe handle and took off in the truck. She managed to hit the interstate and outrun the cops a couple of times, but there was a leak in the fuel line. She started running out of gas about 20 miles from the house, and I guess the concussion I'd gave her didn't help matters. She ran a cop car off the road before running herself off into the woods, got thrown through the windshield, and died right there on the side of the road. I took a swig of the beer and shook my head. "What are you trying to tell me?" The big mechanic took a deep breath and continued his story. "Truck sat here in the garage for years, just beat up and all how she left it. I fixed it up and tried to drive it a few times, but she wouldn't let me." "She wouldn't let you?" "Would you have believed me if I'd told you my dead sister wasn't going to let me sell her truck? No. You'd have laughed and you'd have gotten in it anyway." "So what I just went through was the last night of her life," the big man interrupted me. "At least, it's the way she remembers it." We stared at each other in silence for a few minutes, neither of us sure what to say to each other. I knew he wasn't lying. Don't get me wrong, I'd have never believed him unless I'd experienced it for myself, but there was no doubt in my mind that something didn't want me driving that truck. "So, I'm real sorry about all that," the big man finally said, breaking the silence. "I tell you what, if you're still interested in that truck, I'll sell it to you cheap." I looked back at the truck and saw the young girl with the broken body smiling at me from the driver's seat. I handed the man the half-empty bottle of beer, and without a word, walked back to my own car and drove away. Thanks for listening, and at this time, I'd like to give a special shout out to my first 2 Tier 3 Patreon subscribers, Tech10K and Miriam Joyle. Thanks so much for your support. Y'all are so awesome.